Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to tune in to this edition of In Conversation With. As you know, October is ADHD Awareness Month, and APA is focusing all of our conversations this month on the topic of ADHD. So, our guest today is someone who is not only a qualified accredited member of APA, but they are also one of the UK's leading authors on the subject. So I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome our guest, but I hope that this is not going to be the end of the conversation for people watching this edition. Please bear in mind that as you go through this conversation, or as we go through this conversation, you will be able to get CPD recognition. All you need to do is click the link in the description of this video. Complete the questionnaire, because as most people will be aware now, APA does not hand out CPD certificates just for watching. Let us know what you learn. Let us know what you've gained from the experience. And that's where we know the value of that CPD. So, without further ado, let me please welcome Sarah Templeton. Sarah, good afternoon now. How are you?
Extremely well today, Dave. How are you yourself?
I'm good.
All good.
It's been an eventful day.
Yeah.
But we have had some amazing feedback around the work that APA's done on neurodiversity on a larger scale, and I know you've been part of some of that. But for those that don't know you yet, let's give them a brief introduction before we get started.
Okay, brief introduction. I was diagnosed ADHD just before my 52nd birthday. Then and that was the same year that I qualified as a counsellor. So wow. They both happened in 2015. Then about 2 or 3 years later, after working with lots of ADHD clients and listening to their stories, I began to realise that I'd got some of what are called the comorbidities. And I then went on to get diagnosed with severe dyspraxia with 1% processing, which shocked me, but made complete sense. Sensory processing disorder and dyscalculia, wow. which now apparently, what I didn't know at the time, but I do know now very well, is that 80% of people with ADHD have at least one of these coexisting conditions. Very often it's dyslexia. That's the most common one. But 50% of people have 2 or more. So I fall into the 2 or more, which was, I didn't find that out till my mid 50s. No, late 50s, even 57, 58. But the other thing I've done is purely because I started to get overwhelmed with clients. I set up on my own, self-employed on my own, quite happy to be, as a counsellor. And then I started getting lots of people coming to me for trauma therapy and relationship therapy, neither of which I was qualified in. So I then started to look for other therapists that kind of were. And we built up a team of about 4 or 5 of us. And that was it for about the first couple of years. And then other people started to approach us, and we got busier and busier and busier and busier to the point that today we have 100 therapists now who are all ADHD diagnosed. Some of them are also ASD diagnosed. A good portion are probably maybe 35, 40% are ASD diagnosed as well, which is terrific for understanding and working with clients with the same conditions. And then loads of us have got loads of the comorbidities. So between us, we've got the dyslexias, the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the chronic fatigue, the dyscalculia, the sensory processing disorder, the social anxiety. There's so many. One of the phrases they use with ADHD is it's a big umbrella and a lot comes under it. And that is so true. There are so many conditions that you think, wow. I mean, I don't know. Have you even heard of alexithymia and dyslexithymia?
Do you know, it's like every conversation you and I have, you bring something new to the table.
Well, this one, I'd never heard of these. until somebody said they got it, and I of course went away and researched it and looked it all up. Then find out my partner's got it and my brother. And alexithymia goes very often with ADHD and nearly always with males. Not completely, but most often with males.
Wow.
And alexithymia is a crippling condition. It means they don't feel emotions. They have no emotions at all. So, and I've talked in depth with my brother about this, because it meant every single relationship he's been in has crumbled, because he's ADHD as well. So they just don't have the feelings, and they have to kind of copy feelings. My brother explained it to me once. He said, I was at a concert that I really wanted to go to, and I really liked the band, but he said, I didn't know how to show that I liked. Yeah, so he looked around and he watched all these people sort of clapping and singing and dancing, and he just didn't have any of those feelings in him to do that, although he liked their music. He purely liked their music. So alexithymia and dyslexithymia is when you struggle to name emotions. And bizarrely, I think I've got a bit of that myself, because I for years and donkeys before I was diagnosed, I had lots of what I just called my strange habits, my strange ways of doing things and being different. I now actually realise pretty much all of those were down to anxiety, but it never entered my head that it was something with a name that was, you know, called something. But when I was told that ADHD people always have a level of either anxiety or depression, I suddenly thought, oh my God, these things are anxiety things, and I've not realised. So I think I've got a touch of the dyslexithymias myself, you know. So really, that's kind of who I am. And then just the quickest update, about 3 years ago, because I was saying all the same stuff to so many different clients, a friend of mine said to me, you should write all this down in a book. And I said, I haven't got time. I'm seeing too many clients. And that's when she said, you need to get more therapists in to see your clients, and then you write the book. So I wrote a book for parents, came out, it's pushing 3 years now. And I thought it would be clients that would buy it purely. And I was happy with that. I was happy to give it to clients and go, read this. This will help you understand your son or your daughter. But then it went mad. It literally right from the beginning, it just went mad. And it sells all over the world. And it sells more in America than it does here, which just blows my mind, because that was not ever in my wildest dream. Do you know what I mean? Genuinely. Never thought that would happen for a million years, because America's the home of ADHD, and there's chock-a-block with thousands of books over there. But what they seem to like is that mine's very non-academic, and it's quite funny, and it also talks about me and all the dreadful things I did and why I did it and what the thinking was behind it, and now how ashamed of it I am and all the rest of it. So people seem to relate to it because it's on a very normal, non-PhD doctor, you know, level. It's just I always say it's Sarah from my Wickham just talking about ADHD.
And that's very much the connectivity that you've been able to connect with other professionals that, as you say, have got a diagnosis, and as more awareness within the diagnostic arena comes through, we're able to start to really kind of drill down on those coexistences. And I think what really kind of surprised the APA team was for all of the awareness that has been promoted and organizations have trumpeted awareness, the action and the connectivity to that awareness is almost like getting blood out of a stone.
Are you talking about like counselling type of organisations, or any organisation?
In general.
In general,
We've seen a huge increase in the awareness of terminology, and I think that's as cold and as hard as it might seem, it does kind of feel sometimes that we're aware of the terminology, but generally we haven't adapted to what that terminology means in reality.
I 100% agree with you. I always say to people, I'll give you a very sort of controversial example. There are sex offenders in prison because of their undiagnosed ADHD. Yeah, because traits of ADHD are risk-taking, thrill-seeking, pushing boundaries, being impulsive. So there are sex offenders in prison with ADHD. I've worked with 2 of them when they've come out. Now, there are a lot of people in the ADHD world that don't like that. They don't like to think that ADHD can be connected to sex offending. And I always say, well, tough, because that's real life and that's what's going on. And if we bury that and pretend it's not happening, and how is that protecting children? Getting it out and saying, yeah, we understand that promiscuity, pushing boundaries, are ADHD traits, and some of those are not nice. Some of them are down and dirty. Some of them are rape, some of them are murder, some are not great things. Some of them are fantastic things. ADHD people, on the whole, do amazing things. They achieve incredibly, but we have to embrace the whole lot and just not ignore the bits we don't like. But going back to what you said, it's very interesting that people will say, oh, we accept neurodiversity and we're very neurodiverse friendly and we're ADHD. And then when you throw an ADHD trait at them, they react. So, for example, we can't queue. Yeah, there's not one ADHD person who likes queuing. Now, when I'm on the phone, I hate phone calls because to me they take too long and they get on my nerves. I'd much rather send a quick message. But if somebody comes on the phone and then this is a new thing they've started saying, thank you for your patience. And I say, no, I haven't got any patience. I'm ADHD. That's just really annoyed me sitting on there for 20 minutes. Now, when I say that to people, they have not got a clue what to say. What they should say is, oh, I'm so sorry. That must have been torture for you. I'm really sorry. And then carry on. That's all I need to hear. But for somebody to say thank you for your patience when you've been steaming because you've been holding on for that long. So I think people like to say, oh, yes, we're ASD friendly and we're ADHD friendly. But when the traits hit them in the face, they're not so friendly. They don't understand it so much. And that's what, there's a massive bridge to be crossed yet. Yeah. It's not been crossed.
Yeah,
it really hasn't.
Do you think Siobhan and I sat down probably about 3.5 years ago to look at this, and one of the things that really struck us was that you can have all the awareness in the world, but if, like you say, that connection when you need it isn't there, and then to the person at the receiving end, what you've done is actually belittle the experience that they're carrying.
Well, yes, and that links beautifully into schools. Because schools are, there are some schools, I will not say this is every school, there are some schools who are very ADHD aware, they've got wonderful SENCOs and wonderful SEN departments, and they're doing it right. The others, the vast majority think that once you've got an ADHD child and they're diagnosed and potentially on meds, that marvelously, miraculously turns them into a neurotypical child. They then expect them to act exactly as a neurotypical child, and that's never going to happen. So schools in particular, and again, I don't blame teachers because it's not included in teacher training. We are very much campaigning for it to be included in teacher training. I don't think it'll be many years before it is, because Matt Hancock with his dyslexia, we're working with them if they want screening for dyslexia. ADHD is linked in with dyslexia, so it'll be happening very soon. But at the moment, you've got teachers who they know a child's ADHD, but they still expect them to behave exactly the same as a neurotypical child, and this is where the lack of understanding of what ADHD is really just, it collapses. And the only teachers that are, well, let's put it this way, I've met wonderful SEN teachers, but they've all been either ASD or ADHD themselves. They're the ones who get it, and that's why they're SEN teachers. Yeah. People who've just done a bit of training and read a couple of books and been on a couple of courses, they don't get. I've had so many teachers say to me, well, I just don't understand if when he does blah, 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 is that just George being George, or is that the ADHD? And I said, well, how many brains do you think George has got? Well, of course, one. I said, well, of course, it's all the ADHD then, isn't it? George doesn't choose whether to use an ADHD bit of his brain to react to something or the non-ADHD. He's only got one brain. And then they don't think of it like that. They think of ADHD as behaviour, and then the child is normal as well as having that behaviour.
Yeah, it's almost like that it's something that's in their backpack.
Yes,
and they, when everything's going smoothly, they're not wearing the backpack, and when it's not, they've obviously put the backpack on. And it's that disconnect that I think, if anything, in Awareness Month, that can really be highlighted. I think it is really that disconnect, and the conversations that we've had. We've spoken to an ADHD coach, we've spoken to an ADHD social worker, we've spoken, and we're speaking to yourself, and we'll speak to others, and there's hundreds of conversations going on throughout the month. There's but the same experiences come up over and over again. And it does kind of fall into that disconnect with what does it actually mean in reality. Because like you say, we can all be aware of the label. We can all be aware of the label means that there is difficulties in some things and there is excellence in others.
Could I just pause though? You've used the word label. Would you use the word label about any other psychiatric condition?
I would use the term label again as an umbrella term.
Yeah, you see, label gets used about ADHD more than any other condition. It's just a label. Teachers all say we don't label kids here. Yeah, it's not a label. It's a very, very serious psychiatric condition. It's the only psychiatric condition with a reduced life expectancy of between 15 and 25 years. We have a much higher rate of suicide and self-harm than any other psychiatric condition, and our condition can only be diagnosed by a consultant, not by a GP. So bipolar, for example, can be diagnosed by a GP. ADHD can't be. So I'm not, don't take it negatively, but this is what people do. They go, oh, that label, ADHD. No, it's a very serious psychiatric condition.
I don't want to cause any offence by the phrase.
No, you don't. I'm just pointing it out that's what people do. They use the word label all the time.
And this is where I think there are huge campaigns across the globe around the phraseology, the connect, and again, it's part of that connectivity, isn't it? It's how do we connect to something that really has very little understanding in the real world.
Another word that I will have it nowhere near my website, and none of our therapists use it. But you'd be surprised at how many people use the word suffering with ADHD. We'll have people contact us. Oh, my daughter suffers with ADHD. My son suffers with ADHD. We won't have that at all, because we accept that ADHD comes with negatives. We accept that, it comes with side effects. It comes with coexisting conditions, sometimes very serious and debilitating ones. But there's always the good stuff. For some people, there's not much good stuff. For some people, there's loads of good stuff, because we're all different. But we don't like that phrase, suffering with ADHD. Has ADHD, is ADHD, whatever, but not suffering with. Because especially for children, see, I'm always very, 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 because I write my books for children and for parenting, it's massively important, the terminology that you use with children. If a child grows up thinking they suffer with ADHD and that they've got a lot of people want the name changed. I mean, ADHD doesn't even describe what it is. It's ridiculous. And it also has got the word disorder at the end of it. And a lot of people don't consider it a disorder. I mean, how can it be a disorder when most famous people have got it? Nearly all comedians have got it. Entrepreneurs have all got it. Masses of politicians have got it. Masses of football players, David Beckham, loads of football players have got it. It's not a disorder. It's a difference. We'll take difference, but we won't take disorder. So eventually, I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime, but I think the name will get changed, because it's really not very indicative of what the condition's all about. But there's words like suffering I always say to parents, don't use that phrase in front of your child. You know, it's a superpower, it's a turbo. Our phrase that we use quite a lot is turbocharged by ADHD, because ADHD people got a lot of energy, so they're very turbocharged. So we always come at it very positively. And your organization are very, very, very good about it, because what you do is you ask questions and you listen and you accept what ADHD people tell you. The worst sort of organizations are the ones who think they know it all, and they don't ask the questions because they think they know it all. And they never do know it all, never. But you know, the people who will ask and go, well, what is that like for you, and what is the best way to do this? I'd literally, example, right now I'm on about the 5th edit of my book that's just about to come out, and the editor, who's also ADHD, she said, Sarah, I've just had an idea. Would it work better for this one if you voice noted me the page and actually said to me what the change is? And I said, I don't know, I'll have a go. So I've started to do that, and it's working fantastically, because I struggle sometimes with, I use too many words in sentences and I confuse people by the way it's the 1% processing. I don't get it clearly, you know, for people. So when she said, you know, you speak well, I understand everything you say. So why don't you just leave me a voice note and let's see how it goes? So we've trialed it. She's listened to a few. She said, brilliant, get it. Let's do this. Now, for me, that is 30 times easier than actually making sentences and making it make sense. I have to reread it to make sure it means the same thing. And then sometimes people misinterpret what I've written. I've written it in the wrong way. I totally accept it's me that's doing it the different way, but I don't know how to say things in a way that makes sense to other people. But when I'm voicing it to her, I can go, right, page 7, 8 lines down, 4th word in, should be that. Bang. You know, and it's easy. So making little,
and we've learned this, haven't we? In kind of the engagement that you've had with APA, we've learned, we've grown, we've developed, and I think the kind of what's always stood out for me is, as I said before, every time we speak, there is something new brought to the table, and what I truly love about the whole team when there is that new input is the adaptability, the flexibility to go, how do we incorporate that and how do we make it live and breathe for those people that are experiencing those diversities?
Yeah, but you're so you're not unique, but you're rare. There are very, very few organisations that are like this. I'll give you a very quick example. Somebody I know who's ADHD and ASD, and quite a senior, I don't know what she does, but she's a very senior person. She's just got a job. I don't know exactly which organisation it is, but it's something to do with the Navy, and it's something based in Portsmouth, and it's some big organisation connected to them. Now, she was told before she went there that they were very neurodiverse, aware, and all the rest of it. Now, she's been putting on LinkedIn that they are. She said everything they've said they are. And it's proving to be the most wonderful experience. Her induction, her this, her that, her working environment. You know, they're completely neurodiverse, aware, and friendly. But that is so incredibly rare. I can't begin to tell you. It's so rare. But it makes the world of difference when you get that little bit of adaptation, you know.
And it's that receptiveness to adapt. And if you know, I've said it over and over again, pardon me, that in my mind, everything I've learned from Siobhan, everything I've learned from yourself and our members, and I am humble enough and to be able to kind of say I'm learning from all of these people. But it seems to me that our species started in what we would now class as neurodiverse.
Yeah, a lot of people think that.
Survival of the masses became conformity, and that suppressed all of those individual coping capacities outlooks, etc.
Mm.
Right? But one thing that has stood out throughout human evolution, someone somewhere climbed a tree to see whether the buffalo were before they went out looking through the plains, right?
Mm.
Now, if you are conforming to the mass hunting party, you're not the person climbing the tree to go and have a look and see where they are.
You're the maverick.
You're the
Yeah.
maverick. You're the neurodiverse going, hold on.
Yeah. I'll do this. Yeah.
Why are we going off over there for 4.5 miles when if I go up there, I can see whether they're actually just round the corner?
Yeah. We're brilliant problem solvers, absolutely brilliant problem solvers.
And that
when
kind of sums up when you said it yourself. When we look at really successful people, really successful entrepreneurs, when we look at really successful performers, we find this there without any question.
Yeah.
And this is why I think the campaign for education to be a lot more responsive to individual, but also to be responsive to the pathway to behavior rather than the eruption of behavior. Because when we look at the pathway, we can start to see those stepping stones of neurodiversity. When we react to an eruption of a behavior, that gets all of that learning gets ignored. And that's when we end up with people in reactionary situations where they're penalized, they are punished, they are excluded, they are isolated. And all of those coping strategies become negative drivers because there's no positive influence.
Well, I don't know if anybody's ever said this to you. This might be new news or old news. They say, and when I say they, I'm talking SEN teachers, ADHD SEN teachers say that if all children were taught in a way that was ADHD friendly, it would benefit all children. Yeah. But because ADHD children are taught in a way that suits neurotypical children, i.e., let's look at this book and write about it for an hour, it does not suit the ADHD children. Whereas if you did something like, let's say it's an hour class and you did 20 minutes of learning text, then you got up and you walked out into the field and you did 20 minutes to go around and collect 10 items from the field. And then you came back in and the last 20 minutes was a quiz with the teacher asking questions. That would be ADHD friendly. Plenty to do, up and down, quizzes, competitions, difference. That would not hurt a neurotypical child. They would probably love learning that way as well. So all it needs is some adaptations. I've got this in my book, you know, that it doesn't take much. I remember classes at school where we were allowed to go outside. If it was hot, you know, the teacher would say, let's go and sit under the tree and read a book. And that to me was so different and so exciting. And my brain was so stimulated. I was so excited rather than just sitting in that boring old classroom hour after hour after hour after hour. So any sort of stimulating, different, innovative ways of educating work with everybody, not just ADHD kids.
And this when we look back at pre-Victorian education, what did we get? What we are now talking about as being neurodiverse education. And it always strikes me as we are relearning what has been suppressed for the last 280 years. And I think the work that's being done to kind of raise that connectivity of awareness, not just the awareness, because, you know, Dave Prowse used to say to me all the time, you can be aware there is a car coming all day long. But if you're not aware what it means if you step off the road, it's irrelevant. So I think, you know, what I really hope that the whole of this month will do is kind of start to focus, what do we want from that awareness? And if we're going to drive awareness moving forward, and I appreciate everything you said about what APA already does and the way we operate, etc. What would you like to see organisations in general start to be looking at for the next year before we get to October next year?
One word: screening. Screening is what needs to happen, and it is starting to happen. My charity has started screening in police stations. We did a pilot this year from May to August, which showed that over 62% of people going into a police station for the first time were ADHD, and that didn't include the people that were already diagnosed ADHD. So it's way over 62%.
Wow.
So screening is what I want to happen. I want it to happen, and it is starting to happen because we're working with a lot of police forces, quite a few probations, quite a few youth offending services, less prisons. We're trying with the prisons, but they're very, very, very understaffed, the prisons. But the police and the others, the probations, they are massively passionate about screening because they've realised pretty much everybody they're arresting is either ADHD or ASD or has got both. Yeah. So, I mean, there's one police team, for example, that I spoke to, and that was I always forget the word, the scamming, the team, what's it called? The people that, I can't think what it's called.
The financial protections teams.
Kind of, but they've got an actual word. It'll come to me in a minute.
We will find that word.
The hacking team. The hacking team. Yeah. So I speak to the hacking team because they've realised that nearly everybody they're arresting is autistic, because autistic brains work in a phenomenal way when it comes to working out codes and passwords and all this. So the police are realising that most of the people out there, risk-taking, thrill-seeking, boundary breaking, all that, they're the ADHD ones. But some of these very clever crimes are actually being done by people who are either autistic or combo, ADHD and ASD. So the police are so aware of this, which is wonderful. Every single police force we talk to are massively aware of it and massively on board. So it's great. So the change that I know will have the biggest impact is screening. Not just in the criminal justice system, massively also in the education system. Because if we start screening these children at the age of 5, which is what the lovely Matt Hancock wants, and we're just teaming up with his charity now because we agree, we want screening for all neurodiverse conditions at the age of 5. Yeah. And then again at every transition, because sometimes they don't show up till you're slightly older. So 7, 11, 16, 18, every transition, it would have been picked up at some point by then. And because the thing is with screening, it's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's a piece of paper, So all it costs is a college or a school to photocopy a piece of paper 30 times. Or if they'd rather, they can do it online for free. But screening needs to be happening standardly, because when I say the suicide and self-harm rate is higher with ADHD, I can't begin to tell you how true that is. There are clients of ours, we have lost now 2 clients. One was age 16, one was age 30. And they were both ADHD. The girl was also ASD, and that's just my little hub of my little world. Take that out across the whole world, it's much, much higher. So purely for the suicide and self-harm reduction reason, we should be screening. And I could give you 100 other reasons as well. One of which would be self-esteem. Because when you are told off constantly, as I was all my life, for fidgeting, talking too quickly, interrupting people, not letting people finish, in my mother's words, doing everything in a tearing hurry, not concentrating on what you're doing, not paying attention to what you do. When you have this over and over and over and over, and you don't know there's a reason for it, it gives people crippling low self-esteem. There's a figure out there, and I always get it wrong, but it's something like by the age of 12, an ADHD child will have heard 10,000 negative messages.
Wow.
So when you think of those negative messages, and I've heard them all, stop fiddling, stop chewing, stop making noises. Something that I do that I didn't even know I did was I make some noises sometimes, particularly when I'm eating. If I'm enjoying something, I will make like noises. Now, I wasn't even aware I was doing it until I was told off for it. you know, so you get told off. You get very used to being told off when you're ADHD.
Yeah.
Very used to it.
Let me
very used to it. Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. We touched on this in the conversation with I think it was with Joe Livingston, I think, around masking and female children.
Yeah.
And young girls in survival mode because of the environment in which they're in, masking their pressure points in order to kind of just avoid the backlash and everything else that they experience. Do you think that had, and I asked Joe the same, but do you think that masking capacity in girls, which is clearly in a higher proportion in girls, but do you think there is a connection to the hormonal cycle of development through the lifetime that we are only just beginning to understand, and that's why diagnosis is coming later in girls?
Well, what I think about that, and I don't only think it, I firmly believe it. It's girls are better at managing their emotions. Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah. And also girls will talk to people about, when I worked in the homeless world, this is a very big thing. When women have problems, they'll discuss it with other women. They'll go and talk. Yeah. Men won't. On the whole, they don't. Yeah. So when you've got ADHD, men or boys, teenagers as well, have got the testosterone element. Yeah. So they are much more likely to react physically to something. Girls are more, I never ever use the word masking for me, because I don't consider I did mask. I consider I complied at school when I didn't want to, when I was bored, stupid for half of it. I remember sitting looking at clocks, wishing that thing to click on so I could just move on to get out of the chair and move to somewhere else. So I wasn't so much masking. I personally knew what was expected of me, and I was intelligent enough to know that I didn't want to get told off, and I didn't want detentions and all that sort of thing. So I behaved as was expected of me. What I did have, though, at home was attitude, I'm told. Now, I developed this attitude when I was 12, didn't choose it, it just came. I now know that it came because of puberty, onset, ADHD is connected to hormones. But there are a lot of girls that mask. I think masking, and some people might disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. In my experience, it's more autistic people that mask. They pretend more to be social and to want to go out and to want to play, and really they don't want any of those things. So they tend to mask and what's the word? They try to fit in with what is socially expected of them more than ADHD people. Because ADHD people, one of our traits is that we always know best. That is not an autistic trait. So an ADHD trait of always knowing best, we'll just do what we want because we know best and we're in charge and we know best. So for me, masking applies less to ADHD people and much more to autistic people. But as I say, that's my personal opinion on that. And I think ADHD people, because we're also impulsive, we don't sugarcoat things, and stuff just comes out. So we're not great at masking because it just comes out, which is why the ADHD kids get in trouble and get told off, because we'll go, oh, this is boring, or this is rubbish, or it'll just come out impulsively with no thought of the consequence, because an ADHD brain doesn't naturally think of the consequence. Now, an autistic child may feel the same, but will be able to manage that better and mask because they don't have that impulsivity, not thinking of the consequences. Yeah. So
I see that. Yeah. It is that kind of, again, it's the awareness of how things play out. And as much as there is the individuality and everything else, I think what you've highlighted is that we have so much further to go in understanding the reality of what a term of awareness means.
Yeah.
And we can be aware of the term all day long. We can be aware of the name, and we can be friendly to the name all day long. But if we're not actually looking at what does that mean, and how do we flex outside of that individual experience in order to maintain a balance for both parties in that kind of equation, we are never going to be able to truly say something is friendly to a diversity of any kind.
No.
And I think, I'm kind of minded of Transport for London's campaign for, step-free access. Yet the access points for lifts can be 300 yards further away than if you were actually walking with everybody else. Well, that's not step-free access. You've actually got further to go in order to access a lift. Well, if you're on crutches, then it's not really helpful, is it? So it's, this is something that I think, we do have a long way to go. And not, I appreciate the work that Vonnie and the team do in looking at how APA can be as accessible as possible to all diversities. But APA is only one component in a miracle of components. And I think you're right. Screening at those key points, when screening is really, really formulaic and really, really simple. But acceptance of results is something that we know is a system nightmare.
Yes, and at the moment, I hope this won't be long term. At the moment in this country, certainly in Wales and certainly in Scotland, we don't have the professionals to cope with the amount of either autistic or ADHD or dyslexic or dyscalculia, diagnoses. We just don't have enough occupational therapists, enough psychiatrists, psychologists who are trained up in these conditions. Now, that needs to change, and quickly, because there are, I won't get started on waiting lists, but, it's very common. We had somebody the other day who was told that the waiting list for her ADHD assessment was 4.5 years. 4.5 years? It is ludicrous. So we're not short of psychiatrists and psychologists in this country and people training in that. We're not short of them. What we're short of is the neurodiversities being included in their training. That's what needs to change. And once every psychologist and every psychiatrist in this country, and even GP, quite frankly, because GPs can diagnose ADHD, and this is something that's interesting that you'll like. We've had contact recently from several GPs who've taken things into their own hands. They are what they are calling provisionally diagnosing people and medicating them, because they're not prepared. These are people in addiction services, homeless services, where people are suffering, and they're not prepared to put them on a 4-year waiting list and watch them suffer for 4 years when they know perfectly well what they need. So they are provisionally diagnosing them, medicating them, and they've all told us the results are absolutely wonderful. And that's what's going to start happening. It's happened here. Our local private doctor here, he's just set up an ADHD service because I go and see him and I've told him what the state that, everything's in. He's set up a service where if you've got a diagnosis, he will not diagnose. You've got to have a diagnosis. But if you've got a diagnosis, he will medicate. So he will medicate children and adults. And that's desperately needed because there are so few psychiatrists and psychologists who are qualified in ADHD. The waiting list, even to see them privately, is at least 6, if not 9 months. And when you've got a child who's at school, who's self-harming, who might be having suicidal thoughts, who might be using alcohol to cope, who might be struggling massively with friendships, being bullied. You know, you can't wait 9 months. You can't wait 9 days. You need them done now.
Yeah,
so doctors are just taking matters into their own hands, and I'm really glad they are. They need to.
And education being able to expedite assessments and everything else, and their understanding increasing to allow that. And we know how the support system is interconnected to each point, and if diagnosis is made early at that preset screening points, support system can go in. And those support systems do not have to be hugely expensive. They do not have to be hugely disruptive to education. As you said, 9 times out of 10, if the actual class teaching model was supportive of that diagnosis, then everyone benefits. It's not a them or this. And that's where I think education and psychology will start to blend. I think the medical profession, you're right, doctors who will kind of go through that provisional diagnosis in order to allow the pathway of support to start are going to be the mavericks that make that happen.
They are. I mean, the one in particular who is attached to a homeless charity, he said, Sarah, the difference in those people, he said, it's off the scale. And he said, and that is why I'm not prepared to stop. And he actually told me he's in a big city. I won't name which, but he's in a big city. But he said, I know of at least one other doctor's surgery that's doing this, and I suspect more. You know, and I'm thrilled, because if a doctor can diagnose bipolar, they should be able to diagnose ADHD. It's not hard. You know, we've been referring people for ADHD assessments for 10 years, and we've not been wrong once. You know, we know what we can't diagnose it, but we can recognize it.
Yeah,
so
and that's
the
key,
diagnose it.
Yeah, and that's going to be the key moving forward. So I want to thank you for your time. I know you were up to your eyeballs in editing your
but that's okay.
book.
It's going well,
and it's I can't wait for that. The kind of the work APA does, and I think it for anyone that isn't already aware and hasn't kind of been around any of these conversations before, it's worth pointing out. APA members who have a recognized specialism can be recognized with a recognition award. But we're not the people that are saying these are specialists. The professional says, this is why I am a specialist in this area. And you, as a member of the public or a prospective client or as a parent or as an educator, you can find out what that professional says about their specialism. You decide if that's enough for you to engage with them. And that puts the power in your hands, not in a group of academics and a group of professionals outside of education. You're in control. And when we look at the connectivity solution, how much more power can there be than the client themselves saying, this is where I want to work with, this is how I want to work with this person. And that relationship is built based on that knowledge, that understanding, and the shared experience. I can't imagine a fairer way of going, why is that person a specialist, rather than hearing from that specialist.
Well, I 10 years ago, I knew nothing. But when I was diagnosed in 2015, I always at school, I've always been the same. Once I find out something, I need to know everything, so I literally read every book, Googled every person, Googled every trait, worked with thousands of clients over the years, literally from 5, 6 up to 70s. and listen to so many people, because that's another thing that people don't understand. There's no two ADHD people who are the same. We're all totally different. So you learn so much by working with all these clients that now, finally, yes, at this grand old age, I do consider myself an expert, especially on ADHD in the criminal justice system, and especially on ADHD in education, or education full stop, because I can see where it's going wrong. With it, again, it's a very long story, but I failed myself at 12 plus because of dyscalculia. And had they not, if they'd identified the ADHD, they would have picked up the dyscalculia. I would have passed my 12 plus, but I didn't. So I spent 4 years at the wrong school, despite the headmistress ringing my mother at the end of the first year and saying, I've got a place for her at the grammar school. My mother couldn't afford the school uniform, so I had to stay at the secondary modern school. She didn't tell me this till I was 16. But I don't want other children, I know, we won't even go there, but I don't want other children to have what I had, which was the wrong education, because nobody had picked up that I had very obvious, pretty obvious ADHD and very obvious dyscalculia, you know, but nobody picked that up. And I want to stop that happening. It's wrong, because it gives people low self-esteem, and it gives you a very low self-worth. You know, you feel you're hopeless, useless, worthless, rubbish,
And
all these
that rolls
things.
out into every other component, connection point throughout life. And
100%.
all of the employability factors, all of the aspirational factors, all of the relationship factors, all of the medical factors that come from negative coping strategies because of those factors. It's all connected. And this is, you know, this is why
and massively connected to addiction. I mean, have I got 1 minute to tell you one story?
Go for it.
I had a school reunion at the weekend. Girl I was friends with, I've always suspected she was ADHD. Found out more at the weekend that yes, her father was an alcoholic. She did the ADHD test in front of me, scored very highly, and sobbed all afternoon because she was realizing that she was. But tragically, her younger brother, now this is shocking, when her younger brother was young, they used to tie his legs to the chair at school to keep him sitting down, yeah, because he was so hyperactive. Now, when she told me that, I nearly wept, because, I mean, to me, that was like Victorian type behaviour. This is in the 70s, yeah. So, but I said, how's your brother now? She said, he was an alcoholic like my dad. He fell over when he was drunk. He damaged his head, brain damage, now in supported living. That is because of undiagnosed ADHD. That girl was with me at school, same year as me. And if her ADHD had been picked up, then her slightly younger brother's ADHD might have been picked up, and he might not now be living with brain damage, alcoholism, and in supported living, and had no life, no marriage, no babies, no nothing, because of undiagnosed ADHD. And the tragedy is, Dave, and this is what gets me really angry, is it's the same now as it was then. So that this was all 30, 40 years ago, but it's no different now. They're still not screening for these conditions, and they've got to, because it's ruining lives. It's destroying lives all over the place. And that's my message that I'm getting out, that this is a serious condition and it needs screening for.
And awareness without action is pointless.
Totally.
If we do nothing with the awareness, if we do not adapt, if we do not adjust, there is no point, and nothing changes.
Absolutely.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Everybody out there, please, if you have gained anything, click on the link in the description. Get yourself that CPD questionnaire. Let us know what you've learned, what you've been able to develop in your practice to be able to support your clients on the back of this. Get yourself that CPD certificate. For now, I want to say a massive thank you, Sarah, for you out there. Take care, and we'll see you in another episode very, very soon. Bye for now.